Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast where I give you my unfiltered takes straight off the cuff. And today I'm going to be talking about the new album from Yeule, Glitch Princess. So this is a pretty unique album. It's a very electronic album. Essentially, the way I would describe it is kind of like ambient pop that draws from hyperpop. I would say it's a pretty unique sound. I haven't really heard a ton that sounds even close to this, honestly. I would almost describe it a little bit like hyperpop or ambient pop grouper. For those who don't know, grouper is a singer-songwriter who makes very washed-out, reverb-heavy, very dense kind of ambient soundscapes through her singer-songwriter or folk kind of like approach, I guess. Grouper in her own right is a very unique artist, and I'd recommend anyone check out the record AIA, Alien Observer. I think it's a fucking awesome record, but yeah, this record kind of hits me in a similar way, but it comes from the pop angle, and specifically draws from kind of like hyperpop a little bit at least. There's like an influence with some of the more glitched out and bright synth effects and stuff like that. So I guess overall, just to give my broad impression, I think this record is good. It's really, really enjoyable for the most part. I wish it was a little more varied. It feels like one of those records that it's very cohesive, so it creates like a solid atmosphere that you'll get sucked into as you listen to it, and it makes it feel like she really has a distinct sound that's quite unique to her. However, the weakness to that is that some of these songs really do bleed into the mix as you're like you're journeying through like the thick jungle of vines that is this record, and a lot of them are going to be hitting the same beats essentially. But the whole thing kicks off with My Name Is Nat, which is a really odd intro that sets the tone quite well. You have really loudly mixed vocals, and essentially a character or the main singer, I guess, just describing a bunch of things she likes with incredibly sparse synths and effects in the background. It doesn't really go anywhere especially, but it does set the stage very effectively. And the first actual song you get is a solid representation of what this record is going to do for you. It's called Electric. It's a slow song with some like really maxed out synth effects that really remind me of hyperpop for sure. This is probably one of the more hyperpop influenced tracks, at least to my ears. You get lots of hanging drone notes in the background, and the song does a good job of building a couple of elements to complement the vocal performance, which carries the whole song. And I really, really enjoy the brighter synth sounds that pop in and out of the mix. There's a couple of like glitched out effects as well that really add a little lot of texture to it. So yeah, solid opening track, no issues with it. The next song, Flowers Are Dead, is one of the more ambient, washed-out songs. The beat is heavily soaked in reverb and hangs quite far into the background. This is one of those ones that did bleed into the record a tiny bit for me. Like, I can't exactly remember a hook or anything from it especially. But one thing I will say is because this record is so dense, I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of those albums that I end up enjoying more on repeated listens, just because there's so much like experimental sound play from front to back. It's hard to digest everything in one go, and it can all hit in a very similar way. I actually think if anyone here knows the band The Armed, they do a very similar thing, but I adore the last two records they've put out and think that once you break through that barrier of just the sheer wall of noise, you can really get into the songs of that record. And this could be the same, to be fair. I don't know yet, obviously. But either way, Flowers Are Dead kind of bled into the mix a little bit for me. The next song, Eyes, definitely stuck out a lot more. So this one is, for the first half, essentially a piano ballad. It's one of the most stripped back songs on the entire record. You just get the whisper quiet, kind of like hushed vocals that carry the entirety of the first half of the song essentially, and then around the 2/3 mark you get a change into a more sinister droning passage before introducing a backing beat to close the song out, and it's a really great transition. I think this is a highlight on the record for me for sure. I think it helps that it is very different to a lot of other stuff that's here, but yeah, really, really cool song. I enjoyed this one a lot. The next song is another song that I feel like stands out in the mix quite a lot. Perfect Blue. The instrumental sounds like something off a Drive soundtrack, the film Drive, but like just completely underwater. It's such a like deep sound coming from almost every instrument. You don't get many of the higher frequencies at all. But then eventually this, more or less most of this mix rises almost like out of the water and just blasts out your speakers during the verses. And this song builds up to a pretty satisfying washed out close. This is another one that I really did enjoy. It had its own vibe. Don't Be So Hard on Your Beauty is the next song, and this one reminded me quite a lot of Sweet Trip, actually. It has a heavy use of what sounds to me like I guess like an electronic or artificial representation of an acoustic guitar. It really, like I said, it really does remind me of something Sweet Trip would have done off their one acclaimed record that I can't remember the name of. Again, quite stripped back. It's mostly just guitar and vocals, and with some synth bits coming in towards the end. Nice song, not a highlight especially, but it does stand out in the track listing here. And now, as we get into kind of the back half of the record, which I think is the half that people are enjoying more from what I can gather, this is where a lot of the songs start to like bleed into each other, because essentially from here to the end, you just get a wall of really dense, like ambient pop, art pop, just for the most part bangers. They are obviously using the word banger on this record is a little strange, because again, all these songs hit in such a kind of like low-key way. But there are definitely still a lot of moments that will have you, kind of bobbing your head, or there's a couple tracks here that the hooks really are quite memorable in my opinion. One such song is probably the most pop, like standard pop song on the entire record, and that's Too Dead Inside. The instrumental is just, it sounds a lot more like a standard pop song for sure. It has a pretty straight up pop beat and some of the less glitchy singing on the record as well. That's something I probably should have mentioned. Across this whole record, the singing has a ton of effects laced into it, and a lot of them are skips and glitches and that kind of thing, and it really gives it like a unique quality. I gotta say, I haven't heard it a ton applied to this style, and it's something that I think is very reminiscent of hyperpop for sure, but the way it feels like such a large element of this record helps it stand out quite a lot. But yeah, Too Dead Inside, solid kind of more standard pop song, has enough of the personality of the album that it doesn't feel out of place or anything like that. But yeah, solid song, very memorable for sure. And I guess I should talk about maybe a couple of the other songs on the back end, but like I said, the vast majority are just going to be these kind of like more standard hyper poppy type songs, I suppose. Friendly Machine, I remember quite distinctly. It's probably one of the more memorable songs on the entire record. I thought it's really cool. It has it's very synth heavy, and there's plenty of electronic effects that drown out the bare bones beat. But it works quite well. Like the beat hangs really, really far in the background, and it is such a like maxed out track on the rest of the instrumental. With the rest of the instrumentals, I guess. And it creates quite a strange effect, but it works really, really well. It sounds, again, a little bit like some of the other records. It doesn't stand out a ton. It's more memorable just because the effect is quite memorable. I think I think the hook on that song is really memorable as well. Or at least it stuck out to me on a first listen. And then you get to the final cut, which is Mandy. This is the closest to the intro cut, essentially, and you have an instrumental that's playing second fiddle to the vocals, at least for the first half, but then in the back half it kind of brings in one of the harshest and most dense instrumentals across the entire record. Specifically, I'll mention the harshness on this one, because there's a lot of distortion on some of the notes that are played, and that's something you don't really get on this record, because it is trying to be more ambient and more droney, as opposed to straight up harsh like you might expect from someone like Sophie. So yeah, I think that more of that could have helped distinguish a couple more of these tracks, but that's not to say that, that's not to say that this track, that's not to say the rest of the record isn't enjoyable. I just think it would have helped bring a bit more variety, which is kind of like my main criticism, I guess. But overall, really enjoyed this record. It was a cool ending note for sure. But like I said, I just wish some of the harshness showed up on other tracks here. But yeah, I enjoyed the record. It's decent for sure. I'm going to listen to it a lot more, I reckon, because it really does have quite a unique vibe. I really can't put my finger on much I've heard like this. You can tell where its influences come from, which is interesting, but it's yeah, it does definitely stand on its own 2 feet. I hope that's a saying that people say, because I have no idea. It doesn't sound like something I've heard before. But whatever, it stands up on its own 2 feet. Let's go with that. But yeah, if anybody's interested in a kind of off the beaten path, very electronic, very inorganic pop record, I would definitely recommend this. I will say a couple of the sounds are a little bit amateurish, or maybe a little bit like too plasticky, but for the most part I don't mind it, because it helps the record carve out its own identity to some extent, and again it really is like pulling from that hyperpop playbook in how artificial everything sounds, and for the most part it sounds pretty good. Most of the experimentation on here goes over very well. It's just, yeah, a couple moments here and there just sound a little bit, I wouldn't say amateurish, but not as, I don't know, maybe not as unique as it could have done. But yeah, cool record. Washed out, lots of washed out low-key singing, lots of washed out low-key instrumentals. Some of them go weirdly hard. In a way, it reminds me of the new FKA Twigs record a tiny bit. Just because that record had a similar thing. I guess this record's less moody, weirdly enough, at least in my opinion. But it's more atmospheric, I guess, which makes sense. It's going for that. But anyway, I'm just rambling at this point. So yeah, go check out this record. It's cool. If you got Spotify, you can go listen to it free. So there's really no reason not to. It's a really, really good pop record to start the year off for sure. Because like I said, it's just very unique. Anyway, I'm rambling. Cheers for listening, everyone. Peace out, and I'll hopefully see you around in the next one. All right.